For me, it's always good to hear that with all the work we're doing, with all the effort that we're putting into our work, we're not only addressing policymakers, we're actually also attracting people, researchers, into our world, and we're trying to make change happen. Because, as you will see from the next slide, why is the European Commission here? You know, I mean, the European Commission is a political organ. It has nothing to do with learning. But actually, the European Commission has an in-house research center, a joint research center. And a part of that research center, we have one institute here in the beautiful city of Seville. So I'm very lucky that I didn't end up, for example, but not. So in the beautiful city of Seville, and this is the Institute for Prospective Technological Studies. Now, this still has very little to do with education, but part of one unit in this institute is the Information Society unit, where I work. And part of our work is devoted, on the one hand, to looking into e-inclusion and inclusion in general, and on the other hand, into looking how technologies can facilitate new forms of learning and modernize education and training. And this is the background in which our studies run. So as Norman mentioned, so far we have different projects running, we have different forms of working. We've run 3 foresight studies, one back in 2006, I think, published in 2008, which had the title School's Over, which we're now not so happy with anymore, because maybe school is not over. Then we had the foresight study 2009 and 2011 on the future of learning. And then recently we have started a study last year with Norman collaborating with us on open education. I will try to give you some ideas that we collected in these 2 later studies, in the future of learning and in the open education study. So if we go to the future of learning studies, what was the key storyline we came up with? It was 2009 and crisis started. So that was important for our approach. So we started back then sort of looking at the drivers for new forms of education and new forms of learning. And we looked into demography, globalization, immigration, technology, and the labor market. So we were trying to generate from the trends that we're seeing there certain drivers that would affect education and training. So, of course, there are many things that are changing because of these changes that happen to society at large. But 2 important things for education and training are, on the one hand, that we need different kind of skills, and on the other hand, that we see that new forms and new ways of learning are already emerging. As concerns the new skills, we need personal, social, and learning skills, much more than we used to in the old times, where knowledge as such was valuable and was scarce. With the internet, knowledge is not the problem, information is not so much the problem. The skill to use that information, the skill to connect the knowledge of different people together is much more important in the 21st century. As concerns the new ways of learning, we have learner-centered learning approaches. And we need to have learner-centered learning approaches because we need these learners to come up with skills, not just to have a set of knowledge. So we have to, for each of the learners, find a way how they can be competent in the area in which they want to be competent. And social learning is much more important because knowledge is distributed. People need to talk to one another. People need to learn how to bring together their knowledge into something that makes sense for the whole team. And there we have, of course, the key word that all of you have been looking for, Lifewide learning. Learning is not contained anymore in dedicated spaces, in dedicated places. Learning is becoming life-wide. It's becoming life-wide and also lifelong. It's happening everywhere and anywhere. So, reflecting on these issues that become important for education and training, we see 3 major trends: personalization, collaboration, and what we call informalization. Learning becoming disconnected from formal instruction. Now, being the Institute for Prospective Technological Studies, you miss something in the picture, don't you? Here it is. Of course, all these changes that we're expecting to happen are influenced by the possibilities that new technologies give us. So these new technologies have a double role. When you look at the picture, see if I can do it. It's here. Technology influences what we need to learn and how we learn. In this respect, it puts pressure on education and training, but it also supports it because it also has the tools that allow us to promote these new skills and to implement these new learning ways. So that's the overall picture. For you, I would like to go a little bit more into detail. So this study that we did between 2009 and 2011 had different work packages, different things we did that we connected all together to this picture that I just showed you. But I would like to go into two packages in particular, this one and this one. The GCM vision building. GCM is a short for group concept mapping. That's a methodology that we did with the Open University of the Netherlands, Professor Paul Kirchner. That was a process of getting expert input into future trends, into the future learning landscape in a very targeted and strategic way. And we had an online consultation using a survey approach to which many, many experts contributed. So I would like to show you some of the results that we have collected in these two work packages. Let's go into the group concept mapping first. So the group concept mapping works by asking experts first to come up with simple phrases. The future of learning will be, and the future learning will be. And just brainstorm and collect. And this way they came up with 203 statements across the 13 experts that in the end participated. Now, these statements were then handed back to the experts and they were asked to cluster them. That's what happened. So that is the joint clustering. So a computer program helped the team to sort of combine the different clusterings to this map. So here you find the 203 statements and the 12 clusters that came out from the expert ratings, if you combine the ratings. Now this is a mess, of course. Then the expert was asked to give the clusters that were described by the statements a name. It's still a mess. So that's how I made it a little bit more nicely. So this is what the experts came up with as the landscape of future learning. Let's try to understand that landscape. You see a couple of clusters are really addressing the topic of how the roles of institutions, the roles of teachers, the roles of curricula and assessment are going to change. Then there are these three clusters that target learning as becoming more personalized and job-related. And then we have in the middle, as a connecting cluster, that is close to all issues somehow, and that's why it's placed in the middle, lifelong learning. And then here on the lower edge, we have the facilitating role of ICT. Now, experts were then asked to rate these clusters on how feasible they are and how important they are. Let's look at the feasibility first. Now, this is in relative terms. You see that it's a Likert scale from 0 to 5. So all of them are feasible and important. They're high on both. They're not really low, which is obvious, otherwise they wouldn't have been mentioned. But when you compare the clusters among one another, the technology clusters are actually more feasible than the others. Lifelong learning is pretty feasible. The changes to teachers and institutions are scattered. Some issues are less feasible, others they considered more feasible. So are the ones about personalized and targeted learning. When we now compare that with importance, the ones that are most feasible are not attributed in relative terms such a high importance. Lifelong learning is both feasible and important. And here we see the, so to say, critical clusters. You see the personalization and the informalization of learning is considered very important, whereas at least these two are considered not that easy to be done. So to understand a little bit better how this landscape would boil down to the individual level, so how will learners actually learn, we created a number of personas. And we used these personas to better understand how different people in different life situations will learn in the future. So we created, is it nine personas? And 4 of them address in a more targeted way, school education. So we have a teacher here, and we have students at different levels with different problems. The other 5 look into the other key question we had, addressing labor market needs and making learners fit for the future, allowing them to gain and regain employment. And there we have different personas. We have Joshua, who recently finished university. We have Sven, who would like to go back to work. We have Ingrid, whose job has become obsolete because technology has changed. We have Slavi, who is a technician and has now been promoted to a management function, but his personal skills are not fit for that. And we have Ingrid, who has never really who has lived her life and all of a sudden realizes that she has to reskill and she does not know what to do. Now, I would like to have a look. No, before I have a look, I will tell you what we did with these personas. So we described these personas. We created the LinkedIn group that Norman is a member of and that I invite you all to become a member of. Back at the time, we had 600 experts. Now we have 5,000, I think. But it's a loose group. It's really sort of not being very active anymore. So we first had a discussion back then with the 600. We had a proper discussion. And then we came up with 4 online surveys where we described each persona we developed in a short way, and then had a couple of statements that we asked experts to respond to. So we had in total 90 questions distributed over 4 surveys, and on average 90 to 150 responses, which is pretty good for an expert consultation. So I would like to show you a little bit one persona in particular, which is Sven.
Learning in the future. In 2025, people will learn all the time. Learning will be as natural as eating or talking. We will learn exactly what we need, when we need it, and in a way that makes it easy and enjoyable to learn. Learning will be personalised, and we will assume responsibility for our own learning paths. We will learn by sharing knowledge and collaborating with others. Our learning will take place in various physical and virtual learning environments. Teachers and trainers will guide us on our learning journeys and help us to improve our learning strategies. Let's listen to what some of Europe's learners in 2025 have to say.
Hey, I'm Sven. I'm 42 years old and live with my wife and 2 children in the Swedish town of Katrineholm. I left school aged 16 and became a technician at a car manufacturing plant. In 2014, production was transferred to Asia, so I lost my job. I became a full-time father, but now the girls are 12. I thought maybe it's time to go back to work. I went to the local job agency, and they put me in contact with my personal job counselor, Ole. He asked me to play computer games for a couple of hours. Well, at least that's what it looked like to me. He explained that these were simulations in which my skills were assessed in a series of different situations and tasks. The results showed that I'm good at childcare. Well, not much of a surprise. And can you believe it? Financial bookkeeping. I am the treasurer of the kids' judo club and organize the household, but I never thought that counted for anything. These results gave me some self-confidence, so I told Ole that for a long time I had dreamt about opening my own childcare center. To my great surprise, Ole thought that this was a great way of combining my entrepreneurial skills, which I never knew I had, with my love for children. Apparently, there is a lack of childcare services in Katrineholm, which means I can apply for a government fund. What is not so easy is getting the necessary qualification and licenses. I've never been a good student and was glad when I could leave school, but Ole, he assured me we could take it step by step. First, my skills can be accredited using the European Informal Learning Credit System. All I will have to do is play another computer game, and that will test me in more detail on relevant situations for childcare and financial bookkeeping. For the additional skills required, we go for a combination of computer-based modules. Well, most of them look like games, and also support from the local training center twice a week. If everything goes as planned, I will be able to open my childcare center in a year's time, on a preliminary license at first, until I pass all of the course modules. Meanwhile, I will start working part-time as an educational assistant in a kindergarten, which also counts towards my qualification. For the business part, I have joined an online network of social entrepreneurs. These guys are all in a similar situation to me, and we help each other out with ideas and tips. To submit and manage my business plan, there is an online app that is really helpful. But the best thing is the officially recommended entrepreneur game. I've already gone bust several times, so I'm glad it wasn't for real. But it means I know what mistakes to avoid. Wish me luck.
So that was Sven. And you see many of the things are not really that innovative and are not that far away or that difficult to achieve. But the key idea for Sven was to not stop at diagnosing his problem, but to offer help in making his dream come true and in acknowledging what the skills he has and what he really is passionate about. So going back to the survey, going back a little bit to research, what were the key issues that came out for the persona of Sven? First of all, as we all know, career changes will be normal. We have to face up to that fact. It's very unlikely that somebody will start a career as a 16-year-old and not change it throughout their lives. We all will have to reskill, upskill, be flexible, and society has to allow for that flexibility. The second issue is self-responsibility. You have to proactively, as a learner, seek opportunities and be ambitious about your dreams. The third aspect, we need to be able to recognize informally acquired skills, because if we don't do that, we close many doors for many people unnecessarily. And for this persona in particular, the focus on the real pragmatic goal, the focus on the practical targeted training, so that learners don't lose sight of their goals. So in total, when we go to the second of our two key questions, how can the demand and supply of skills be matched, when we now go again to the societal perspective and turn our backs on the learners? We need lifelong learning and we need on-the-job training. We need flexibility, we need change, and we need self-responsibility. And the most important point from a policy perspective, we need systems that allow for the certification, validation, accreditation, for taking into account in one way or another informally acquired skills. So, summarizing on this study, we have the two aspects, formal education and professional development. And we have the three important trends: personalization, collaboration, and informalization. When we look at formal education, this is about being learner-centered and focusing on social learning and making life-wide learning a reality. When we more look at professional development, personalization means more offering targeted and flexible training. Collaboration means encouraging peer learning, and informalization means allowing for the recognition of skills. And again, technology will contribute to all these aspects if we let it. Now, I will now turn to the ongoing study to which Norman contributed. So this is a study on open education. Why is it open education now? Because the discourse changes, as it does. You know, we all move forward. And open education is the big thing for policymakers and also the big thing for researchers at the moment. And you all know why. Because we have seen something really strange happening in only 2 years that has surprised many people, and that's the MOOC hype. And you can think about it whichever way you want. You can think about it as something that in the end will be insignificant, or something that will change the whole world of education. But it's something, and that is, from our perspective, interesting, that has not been policy-led. It's something that just came up and made a change, and made an impressive change, and came up to a real big bubble. And that's what we've been waiting for a long time. For one technology to finally make its way up there and surprise us all and show us how different learning could be. Even if in 5 years' time we look back and we think how silly we were back then. So that's why we are all talking about open education. And why? Because you can argue we're here. Some say we're still here. Others say we're already here. But independent of where exactly we are, when you impose on the MOOC hype curve the pattern of technological innovations, you see that we are looking at bubble and collapse, and then we're looking at how to get to the deployment period. And in that situation, we have to shape the future. We have to think about what this golden age could look like and should look like. So that's why policy is so interested in this phenomenon, because we're now at the point where you can shape, at the point where you can try to channel this movement into something that is productive and that will help us all. So when we look back at our landscape from the previous study, what are the important elements that are driven, that belong to this MOOCs hype? Well, we're talking about open education and open resources, obviously. Then it's about globalization of education. I can take a course at MIT. I can. They let me take their course, you know? And informality. You don't have to have a degree. You're not selected. You can just take the course. So these three elements are apparent in particular in this movement. So we, as a research institute, did a study in 2013, and we're currently starting the continuation of this study. And for the purposes of this talk, I would like to look a little bit at higher education. So what is the story for higher education? Well, this is our situation still today. Here's the student enrolls, the education institution selects the students, and the student is then administered content, guidance, assessment, certification, and eventually also some research. What could be the future? Well, the future, thinking positively, could be that it's the student who's selecting. And the student will select between different offers for all these different aspects by different institutions, different people. So the student, a learner-centered approach, if open education is a reality, would be enabled to pick and choose and design their own learning. Now, this is only part of the picture. Because here in this picture, we assume that the student is able to do that. And able means two different things. That he does not need guidance, that he's a self-directed learner who is able to diagnose his learning needs and administer himself the correct medication. And that we're not in this situation where the learner does need some guidance and some help on selecting the right resources, the right learning opportunities, and the right degrees to go for. And it also means that the learner has a free choice. But in some situations, we don't want the learner to have a free choice. We want our medical practitioners to have certain skills and competences. So they have to respect some curricular restrictions. So for certain areas, the free choice is an illusion. There has to be a certain curriculum that restricts the choices students have, and this curriculum will determine what they can select from. But they can still, within these choices, select from a great variety. And then we have the case where we combine the two, where students choose to go for a degree that is more restrictive in what they have to study, and they do so under the guidance of an institution, a tutor, or a group of peers. Now, this is a picture that works for all three sectors we looked at. When we now look at to go into higher education, there are different typical situations we're looking at under the different scenarios. This is an open research scenario, and this is more a lab-based research scenario. Whereas this is the scenario of studying towards a degree, and this is more the Sven kind of scenario of designing yourself your course of study. So when we go back to so this presupposes an open research area. You cannot do research and citizen science if research data is not open, if publications are not open. Here, universities do not actually play a role. We don't need universities in this one. But here we do. This is a research scenario where universities are key because they provide the infrastructure. They provide the equipment, they provide the support. In these two, universities are also key, but in a completely different role. Here, they have a double role, or maybe different institutions have different role. On the one hand, as training providers, as a teaching provider. On the other hand, for educational content. And here, the educational content pops up again. And since it's design it yourself, certification and accreditation become important. When we go back to the MOOCs hype, MOOCs kind of courses will be important in these two scenarios. Whereas here, learning will be more creative and will be less administered through courses. That's our scenario design. Now, what does that mean to institutions? Depending on the scenarios, you see different focus area for higher education institutions. In this scenario, the focus is on certification and assessment. In this one, it's also on certification and assessment, but additionally on guidance. In this one, research is very important, and guidance also. And here, although it's about research, this is not the institutional remit. The important part of institutions is that they make their data openly available and publish openly. So if we put these different functions of universities on top of one another, we get this picture. And what could happen in the future is that these different functions are implemented by different providers. So what could happen is that the services offered at a university as a bundle at the moment become unbundled, and that different institutions decide to focus on different parts of the education process. So let's look at the landscape again. When we have this new research at the back of our minds, we can color in the landscape a bit differently. Remember, at the beginning I said that the proliferation of MOOCs actually points towards these three trends. But there's more to it. There we go. One too much. On the one hand, we have open courses. Open courses mean new ways of learning. They mean ICT comes to the forefront as a tool and an enabler. Then we see a new role for institutions coming. Through the globalization of institutions, institutions become enablers and connectors. They point us towards resources. Learner empowerment. So the informalization of formal education leads also to more learner control and to a greater choice in which way to learn, which also leads to a new focus on pedagogy. And these are the challenges that we are still facing and that in some discussions you see already people addressing. Pedagogy is moving new to the forefront. I went to the eMOOCs Summit in February where I found many people who wanted to develop MOOCs. And all of a sudden, for them it became important to realize how long is the attention span of a person. And for me that was really striking to see that they should have known that. This has nothing to do with MOOCs. People teaching at university should know how long the attention span of a person is. They should know how to design a class so that you get back the attention, you know? They didn't. But now that they're having MOOCs and that they have all this nice data of when people go away from their MOOCs and when they are disengaged, they're realizing this is actually important. It's important to package it, you know? So we get a new focus on pedagogical guidance that I really think is excellent. It should have been done a long time before, and I don't think it was needed to have MOOCs to point people to that. But if that's what MOOCs do, perfect for me. And then we have the pending issue that many are sort of trying to solve in different ways on how to deal with this recognition aspect. How to find a recognition scheme that allows for more diverse learning experiences to be accounted for. Now, there's one I haven't colored in, and I'm not going to color it in. But I'm going to rename it. Because we called it lifelong learning, but when you look at it, it's about learning shifts to home, work, and community. So it's really not only about lifelong, meaning from cradle to grave, but it's about integrated in your life, making all your life relevant for learning. So in this respect, open education, which is the key term right at the moment, becomes an enabler for life-wide learning. So let's see the next phase, once the open education trend is over, maybe is life-wide learning. We'll see. Thank you very much.